Hey, whoa. That is not the audio cue we wanted. All right, guys. Hey, welcome to another beautifully produced show here at the ComicBase live stream. I'm your host, Pete Pickford, and we, boy, the software problems behind the scenes have just been so much fun the last couple of weeks. Having trouble with my board and decided I install the firmware update on it, and as a result, I managed to blow away all the configuration settings on it, except for the sound, which actually I think sounds reasonably good this week. But I did want to ask you guys beforehand, how is the sound both for the intro music and for right now? Is it, are the levels somewhat decent out there in the world? Just you give me a thumbs up, thumbs down in the chat if you don't mind. Um, but anyway, hi, this is the ComicBase live stream. We're going to focus on tips and tricks as well as viewer questions, which means I need your help on this one. If you have questions you would want me to get answered during the show, please put them in the chat to @ComicBase TV, and I will try to hit as many of these as I can. I have a number of them that people sent out ahead of time, which I will be getting into in just a sec. But other, it's going to be a short show unless we get some more. Despite the fact that I can go on forever about the most insignificant issues, but I'm going to try not to. All right, guys. Just a quick round the horn here. I want to say hi to everyone for showing up. I think I saw Richard Scott in earlier. Oro Viejo from Minneapolis. Looks like things are warming up out in the world. Andre, welcome. And by the way, Andre, thank you so much. Andre is the guy who put us over the top for 925,000 covers last night, sending in a ton of new material, and then followed immediately afterwards by Brian Stewart this morning. You guys are burying us with content, and we've been putting out updates in the last several weeks that have all been 40, 50,000 new items every week, and it's just insane. Brian Price from Denton, Texas, welcome. Larry's Library, Ed Billiot, our mod is in the house, Gregory Hecht, and Mike Beam. Hey, welcome everyone who made it. And and there's more. Jet City Comics out in Washington, Ording. I do not know where that is. Jeff Schultz from Phoenix, Fred Slota from West Virginia. Now we got the whole country representing here. This is great. And Brian says, no intro music, but you sound good. Interesting. Didn't okay. Interesting. I heard it in my headphones, but it was much quieter. But well, what the hell? We'll take what we got and we'll work it out ahead of time. But yeah, as of about 10 minutes before showtime, I basically wiped all the macros on my control board. So this is going to be much more low tech than usual. So that's good because it's Q&A. Like we have to do a lot of razzle dazzle. All right, well, let's get to it. First of all, if you guys like this sort of thing, please like and subscribe if you have not already. And also, ComicBase news. We're at build 2209 at the moment. I went to a little bit of it last time, but I hinted more than I said. Some new changes that are interesting. There are some new options for newspapers and magazines for it's called periodicity, which I'm going to make a word, but basically how frequently a periodical comes out. So we now have options in there for weekdays or weekdays plus Saturdays, and those ones will actually auto increment dates. So if you have some crazy newspaper which went from 1896 or so and it published 6 days a week, and you notes start on March 14th, and you say, yeah, just creep me the next, I don't know, 3,000 issues. It will actually auto increment the dates as you go. There's a new location for update logs, and we had to split the update logs because, as we mentioned, we've been doing crazy amounts of stuff of late in terms of new content. And so the update logs are now stored a little bit higher up the chain on your disk. They're no longer buried in the human computing documents, name of your product, logs folder. Now it's just we make a log folder a little bit higher up the chain because, as it turns out, if you have a database with a very long name and we're burying it that far in your disk, there's a chance, however slight, that we could go over the 255 character limit allowed for the full path of a Windows file name, and we didn't want to do that, so we brought it up a little bit. We also are splitting the logs so that each of the media updated gets its own sublog. They're linked from the main log if you click on what's new during the update, but there will be a separate entries for comics, magazines, books, and so forth. So it makes it so you're not just scrolling to see everything that's going on. We had to do this actually because we found out that most browsers, if you get over about 50, 60 megabytes worth of text, will just blow up. There are some big text readers like Notepad that can handle it, and ironically, Opera seems like it handles it just fine. But we wanted to be able to partition things a bit, so if you want to see everything that's going on, we want to make that possible. Um, a suggestion that came out of the live stream a couple of weeks ago, and I think my reaction at the time was, "Huh, good question. We should look at that." We actually managed to make happen in the product, which is in the ComicBase cover gallery, the screensaver that comes with the archive editions. You can now actually have it say, "Show only my comics," or "Only the items that are in my collection." So as a result, it will now act as a pictorial image of walking through your own comic collection if you want. I think the reason we didn't do it originally was because it's bad mojo to have a setting that when the product's right out of the box that it won't work because right when you install the software you haven't put anything in your collection. But if you have and you want to go and have it dig up those things, by all means just go to the screensaver settings in ComicBase, choose the ComicBase cover gallery, and with the newest version, you'll see just to the right of which media you wanted to choose, there's a new option for show only items in my collection, and it will do that for you if you like. One hint I will give on that one just right away, let me switch over to the other machine so I can show it off a little bit, is really good idea if you have not done it before ever to at some point, and this is really best is an operation that runs overnight, but if you're just trying to use the program and you want to make the screensaver really kind of show off the best stuff, go force a rebuild of all the file picture references on your machine. You can do that by going to the file menu. And by the way, I think I even have, oh, you're going to make a liar of me. Let me just make sure I launch the magnifier on this machine. Okay, so hey, there we go. And now we can actually zoom in on things. That's kind of cool. All right, so go here under the file menu. Whoops, let me zoom in first. There we go. All right, so file menu, file tools, go down to rebuild lists. And then if you click this last one at the bottom here, pictures list is slow, which by the way, take that part for real. Even on a very fast machine, we have so many items now that we could be checking the pictures of that, especially if you have the newspapers installed, this is a good overnight kind of thing to run. But if you let it do a rebuild of this right now, what it'll do is it will go search for every item in your database. It'll see, can it find a picture? And if so, how big is that picture? Where is it stored and so forth? And it'll cache off all those metrics about the picture in the database itself, so that when it wants to go, say, pull up a screensaver or pull up images and stuff like that, it's just that little bit faster. And so worth doing once. Do not do this all the time unless you've got a really bad case of OCD. But if you get a chance, not a bad thing to do at least once. All right, and especially do that if you are going to be using the show items only in my collection, because you want, at that point, you want the screensaver to know that both that you have a certain picture, but also that it's associated with a comic book you have. And in order to find a decent number of pictures that meet both of those ones, it's either use the program for a while or force the rebuild. That's probably the happiest way to go on that. All right, getting back to things. The big news lately is content. We've just last night, and again, thank you to everyone who contributed, so many people, but we just blew past 925,000 pictures. We don't know the actual number yet, because one thing we do before we press each quarter's picture discs is we flush out our picture library of any cruft that just happened to get in there which didn't get washed out. So there's a kind of hidden function of the program where you can say, take all the pictures you've got and make a clean copy of your own picture library, which only has the things that are associated with a particular issue. So that if for some reason you've renamed it an issue and you didn't rename the picture that went along with it or something like that, it'll create a clean copy of the picture library. Now, most people do not need to ever worry about this. I'm not even going to tell you where the hidden function is right now, but we do this before we push new master discs because we have to, after every quarter when we're getting ready to update the libraries and everything, we have to then do multiple compressions of 925,000 pictures, and it takes our machines several days. You really usually about a week of doing nothing but compressing to get things into all the formats we need. So we want to make sure that we are not compressing anything that doesn't have direct relevance to all y'all. But once we get that done, we will put that out, and we'll give you a heads up when that's available. And then anyway, any of you guys who want to download that, you can certainly do that. If you've been downloading with Sidekick every weekend, every week as updates came out, you'll have gotten all the latest stuff anyway. Don't worry about it. But if you're coming in clean, certainly it helps to be able to download the especially the quick start pictures, because then you've got in one archive you'll have all 920, I think it's 9,000 images in thumbnail format that you'd want to install on a new machine, and that's a nice thing to have when we try to catch that up every 3-4 months or so. All right, let me see here. Other questions here. Oro asks, did the deep bury of the ComicBase pictures deep down show that sorry, I'm trying to read this. The ComicBase pictures deep down is what saved all my comic covers from bloody ransomware. Huh. Okay, interesting. And let's see. So around 18. Sierra Lift? I'm very confused by this. Around 1958, the term was used by the sense of garbage by Croft. Sorry, he's explaining what the heck I'm going on about. Why students frequenting the Tech Model Railroad Club at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Yeah, no, it's us geek, boys, we have about 1 million terms to to talk about all the foo that just piles up around any collection of technology. I just did a code check-in on ComicBase recently, and the biggest note I had was removed incredible amounts of cruft from database routines, because that's what we do. It's important to clean your room, and that goes for your code as well. All right. So anyway, we talked about the pictures, and the other thing that's big news on the content is we blew well past 1.1 million comic books at this point. We're now adding hundreds of thousands of newspapers as we go. I mean, it's just the level of content that's floating in every week is just insane, and I'm not foolish enough to say that it's going to slow down. So thank you everyone who's contributing all that, and thank you all out to our editors who are managing just barely by the skin of their teeth to keep up with it all. But man, this is incredible, and we couldn't do it without you. So all right, with that said, let's move on to questions. And like I say before, please, if you have questions you want to answer during the show, please post them in the chat. Otherwise, I will answer the ones that we stacked up ahead of time, and then I'll go on my merry way for the show. Probably a relief, because honestly, I am doped up like you can't believe on Zyrtec, and it's starting to get to me. But let's push on, and we'll see what we can do. All right, first question that came in here, and I did not write down who sent these, so I apologize. But if it's your question, hey, congratulations, you're on the show. All right. What is the difference between the item title and the item description? That is an uncomfortably good question. So in ComicBase 2023, we introduced a new field called the item. Actually, we introduced both of these as new titles, as new things. But we introduced item title to help us locate things that have a title that differs markedly from its series title. The classic example of this would be like Classics Illustrated, where Classics Illustrated #1 is called The Three Musketeers. And if you actually pull up the comic, and you look at the cover of it, especially the first several printings, it just says The Three Musketeers. And later on, you see this tiny, steadily growing a little larger with different printings thing at the end that says A Classic Comic, or and then well, by the time you get to about the 20th printing, it then say Classics Illustrated in the upper left hand corner. But the next issue would be something like the Count of Monte Cristo, and the next issue after that would be like Frankenstein. If you're a civilian in particular, if you're just looking at the comic book and you say, hey, I'm holding a copy of the Count of Monte Cristo, but I don't see the series, we wanted there to be a way that you could search and find it by Count of Monte Cristo, and it would say, oh, well, that's classic, clearly issue number X of Classics Illustrated. And I hope the guys back in California managed to take calls because I did not remember to put do not disturb on ahead of time, but I'm doing it now. All right. The another key example of item title is there's a series from Dell called Four Color Comics. Particularly, it ran two different series. The second series ran well over 1,000 issues, and none of the issues were actually called Dell Four Color Comics. They'll say that in the indicia, the little tiny print on the inside, which only comic geeks know to look for. But all the issues be called something like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or Popeye or the Adventures of Roy and Trigger. And so by adding this new item title field, we could both keep these things in their proper order where they are meant to be in terms of comic collecting, and where if you were hip enough to know the actual series, at the same time throw a bone to the people who are just looking for it, based on what's on the cover, and help them find things. Now, the item description, a controversial but very necessary field, which we also added. I think we got this one in last year, but it's definitely it's a new entry to addition to ComicBase. And what that is we wanted a field which we controlled, which uniquely designated which item this was. So you guys might have heard me talking about, we did an analysis with the folks over at Sketched, where we basically, looked at all the releases in the comic industry. And at this point, I believe 77% of all comics are a variant of one sort or another. So 3 out of every 4 comics on the racks, are a variant. Or put another way, the average number of releases of a particular issue is well over 3. So um, uh, with that the case, it's incredibly important that there's someone to say what's the A cover, the B cover, the C cover, the retail incentive to 0.5 third printing cover, whatever the heck the thing is. And unfortunately, the publishers don't do a particularly good job of this. And honestly, the chaos with the distribution, with Diamond getting kind of cut out of the deal, and Lunar and some of the other folks coming in, honestly, it's only adding to the chaos. So, for instance, you might have, we'll just throw a name out at random, the Bill Sienkiewicz cover of, New Mutants, 4th series, number 50A, or whatever, number 50. Somebody might call that the A cover. Some people might call it the B cover. Some people say, well, that's actually the regular cover. And without some definitive thing to say, yeah, the Sienkiewicz cover is the one we're calling number 50A, without some, and that can never change. Because I mean, if you put that into your collection as 50A, yeah, I have it, it's copy number 1. Everything else about that issue could be wrong, but you need to keep the marker of what 50A means. That has to stay the same as soon as it's published. And a lot of times we'll publish this stuff a couple months before we ever get to actually look at it in person, and by then it's not uncommon at all for even the art teams to change. So what could have started as a Mike Diodato cover suddenly becomes a Disraeli Demon Draftsman cover. But the important thing is, once we've said, book number 2B is this particular cover, that's the thing we have to keep hold of. Now, in the old days, we would put the stuff, we would have the cover field, right, which you might know to look at, but we would have it in the notes. And the problem with notes is a field that was shared between all y'all and us. So for instance, we might say that a certain comic is the first appearance of a certain character, and later on, you might say, when I bought this at such and such a store, or I paid $3.83 for it, you might, or I got it signed by this guy. So there's a combination of something which is factually true or not true. It's the first appearance of John Constantine, or something that's absolutely unique to you and we'd never want to touch. For instance, where you bought it, or you've got it stored in box number 73 or something. So the rule we had for notes was always that we would stack notes. So if we had something new to say, we would add to your notes, but we would never overwrite your notes. Well, the problem with variants came in is we used to keep the stuff that told what was the significance of the B cover, and we say, well, that's the Disraeli cover. And if that was in notes, and if someone later on said, "Well, no, actually, it was really the Carlos Pacheco cover," well, then you'd have a note because we never overwrite notes, which said, Israeli cover, Carlos Pacheco cover, and then which one was it really when you're talking about the B cover? This was chaos, and we couldn't do this, especially with the world turning into a place where just everything's a variant. There had to be a way of saying, no, the official line is that the B cover is the Disraeli cover, and that is not something that can be questioned. Because again, otherwise we're just talking about different things. It's one thing to say I like it or I don't like it. It's nothing to say that the B cover is the A cover. We can't do that. So we need to have a field that would control that's unique to us. And so we created a new thing called the item description. And the purpose of the item description field is literally just to say, what is it that makes it this issue? It's inherent to the designating of as the issue. It's not there to talk about who is appearing in it. It's not there to talk about, Superman flew off to Mars, or that's not what that's for. It's literally just to say that the B cover is the B cover because of some distinct marking that it's got on it. So that's what we have got in there, and we call it the item description. Now, there's a lot of semantic overload between item description, item title. I realize, I sympathize. We did not have a better name that ever came up during the years of creating all this stuff, but so that's what that is, and that's what we mean by it. All right, so let me see here. So I've been talking on here. Let me see. Is there anything that I need to catch up on? Blah 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 blah. Um, Armad asks, has item title been incorporated into Atomic Avenue searches? If I search for anything that's an item title, but is the real title field, will it come up in the search results? Yes, I believe the searches on Atomic Avenue work the same way they do in ComicBase, where if you have something that comes up as an item title, it'll come up, like say I'm looking for Porky Pig. It'll find a couple of Porky Pig series, but it'll also find Porky Pig dash named items in other series. And so if you choose that one, that means it's items which have the item title Porky Pig, but really belong to a title which isn't Porky Pig. All right, and Andre asks, is it possible the newspaper, only when deleting an issue, having ComicBase redo the item number field sequence automatically? I don't know how that would work, but if you can give me a little more on that, and we could think of it, we could talk about it. Um, I know with some of these longer runs that you're indexing, and particularly, it'd be really convenient to be able to say, for instance, create all the issues of a particular volume and then go to the next one, and then move on to that one. But let's think on that a little bit more. I could see that one having a lot of complicated edges. All right, Fred Sloat asks, how necessary is it to note in the item description that this is the Joe Smith variant cover if Joe Smith is already entered in the cover artist field? I think it's a good idea. I'm just going to say this is a civilian, because it allows you to cite that up visually without having to look over to another field, because that's especially when you're printing this off on lists or things like that, it's always going to appear right next to the item number. So if you're talking 17A, if the item title's been filled out, or item description's been filled out and says like the Joe Smith variant, then it's like, oh yeah, that's the A cover. It's the Joe Smith variant, as opposed to the Ben Cooper variant, which was 17B. So I think it's helpful. I'm not going to say it's 100% necessary, and I think if you have normal comics, if there is such a thing, I don't think it's necessary to fill out, every single, item description for every issue of the Incredible Hulk before everything was a variant. At that point, I think that's just kind of obnoxious. At that point, that's just kind of noise. But as soon as you get into variants, I think it's important to put in why this variant is that variant, in those things, especially starting in really the mid 90s. When variants first came along in a big way, in the very late 80s, early 90s, we used to have these nice descriptive titles for everything. This is the silver ink variant. This is the gold ink variant. This is the foil cover, the red foil cover. Unfortunately, publishers got very, very creative. Let's go with creative, and they exhausted our ability to come up with reasonably named variants very quickly. By about 5 years in, we weren't even trying anymore. We decided, "Oh, hell with it. We can't come up with a new variant code for the platinum nude, foil covered version as opposed to the platinum nice foil covered version versus the." I mean, it just got insane. So at a certain point, we just said, "All right, fine. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G." The problem with that, though, is that A doesn't tell you anything, especially if you didn't mark it as cover A on the cover. And so you need to always have that little bit of extra information, which says, well, what does the A cover mean? And that's where belatedly we got our act together, because I think we spent about a decade just kind of crossing our fingers and hoping it would all stop. But yeah, clearly looking at it now, it became very necessary to have a sturdier way of handling what variants are which as we go. So that's where item description came in. All right. Ed Billiot says, like the way IDW states cover ABC on their cover, so is there an official naming for each cover? If IDW puts cover ABC, we're not going to argue with them. Here's the asterisk in that sentence. If they actually are good folks and they actually wrote cover A, cover B, I think that's probably the one situation where, let's say they missolicited it somehow, that cover A wasn't really, you know, I don't know. I don't know. They called it something else originally, or they called it with a different artist or something like that. If it was literally written cover A on the cover, I think we'd be fools to try to argue that with them in that case. What's much more typical, unfortunately, is things where, like Zenoscope would do this ones where, like, they'd solicit and say, all right, we're going to have 18 covers for Grim Fairy Tales, number 56. And here are the 18 covers. And we would go and, looking at down at the diamond solicitation, we'd go, all right, here we go, 18A, 18B, 18C, with all the notes, which would describe how they all go. And then they would come out later on, and they'd have a bit of a think on it, or they'd have gone to a couple of comic conventions, or they've done some things like that, and they decide, there aren't just 18 covers. There's really 27. And by the way, we didn't necessarily stick to the same, naming that we originally solicited with Diamond, because who looks at that stuff? And so then they would go and they'd publish in the back page of some comic, hey, look, here's all the covers we've published now for Grim Fairy Tales Presents number 56, and they would, in many cases, have all the ones that they told us about originally, and then simply add to it. Not a big problem. Every once in a while, they'd redo some letters because I don't know, it makes a little more sense to put the Q cover before the Z cover. Whatever they were thinking, they might mess some things around like that in the middle of an ad. And when what they tell the world, where what's marked on the cover is like, this is the nice version of the fan convention exclusive for Rhode Island Comic Con. If they went in an ad later on and something they had originally put up is like, say, the C cover, and now they're calling it the Q cover, tough luck. It's the C cover, because at that point so much time has gone by and there's no clear marking on the whole thing that the ad that came out 2 months later isn't, it's too late to redo the schedule there, Zenoscope, no matter what you might think. Now, at some point we need to freeze this stuff in amber. But that being said, our policy has always been like, if you can solicit it, as having a certain storyline, having a certain creative team, having a certain title. We change titles all the time. We always use the example of DC might have a new Nightwing title called Nightwing Assault on Bloodhaven. But then when you actually get so we add it to ComicBase, it's Nightwing Assault on Bloodhaven. But then issue number 1 actually drops, and in the meantime, someone's thought better of it. And when you actually look at the indicia, it just says Nightwing 4th series or 5th series, at which point it's Nightwing 5th series, because you got to go by what the comic book says. But if the comic book is ambiguous, the comic book never really said, at that point, the thing that has the most gravity to us is, what does precedent of what we've published say, because you don't want to have it so that people are ever going to want to relabel their books. Once you put the book into the database and you've forgotten about it, you don't want to sit there and say, oh no, Grim Fairy Tales number 56C. Nah, changed our mind. It's now 56Q. Not gonna do it. All right. Let's see here. And let's see. I'm sorry. I've got to put on my glasses for this one. And this is trying it on He's trying some things on Atomic Avenue, and he's not getting the results he expected. Don't know. Look into it. It's more an Atomic Avenue question, but I do believe the intent is certainly that Atomic Avenue follows our sorting, and I thought that's how it worked, but I'd have to look it up. Um, but I will check. Okay. Let's see here. And Fred says, if item description is under your control, once information gets nice item description, if that information is duplicated in notes, can it then be pulled out of notes? Yeah, the first time that if you ever do a file tools rebuild a list of information, let me go ahead and show that over here. Switch my control over to the other machine. I finally have dedicated this is actually a Mac running um, boot camp, which I'm using here as my demo machine here. So nice thing is that I can actually sensibly zoom in the screen. So if you go under File menu, go to File Tools and say Rebuild Lists, the key field over here is this item information one right here. What that will do as part of its cleanup is it will look for redundant information. In particular, it will look for anything that's referencing the cover or the edition, and if it's already if it's going to attempt to move that information into the item description field if it wasn't there already. So it will try to pull that redundant information out. But the main thing to keep in mind about this whole thing is that unless you say we're not allowed to update any of your information, item description, think of it as a field that's kind of like under management control. It's one that, as we get better information about these things, we're going to try to push new information down to that one. So don't use it for anything that's unique and quirky and personal to yourself. Use the notes field for that one. We're really going to try to keep the item description field as, like I say, the official word on what variant is what. So that's something that, like I say, and please also don't attempt to reassign those things after the fact, because those are the kind of corrections that are going to get rejected. Because if we said it, if we said it's, the B is the Pacheco variant, and you say, B is no, it's really the Diodato variant. Honestly, unless you're showing us a picture at the same time of it, saying B on the cover with, Diodato art, we ain't going to change it. All right. What we would much more frequently do is bring if we somehow swapped pictures, where we said it, this was the Pacheco cover and you said it was the Diodato cover, we'll get the cover right to match with the description set ahead of time. I'd say the sole exception to that would be is if the issue itself was marked as being A or B or C or something on the edition, in which case at that point you'd be a fool to argue with the physical artifact, I think. Okay, moving on, and let's see here. Is there more? Oh, of course there's more. Okay. Steve asks, a question about a weird thing I came across. Type Renaud Jones, the one, fine box, guess enter, should go to the title, but do the percent, it doesn't. Yeah, there are a couple of characters, and I think this is just going to be one of those things that, we tend to be pretty slavish about making sure quirky, weird stuff doesn't happen much in the whole thing. But there are a couple times when I think you just got to let it go. And one of them, another one came up is I'll talk about in a moment with the spy. Percent in database land that we come from means it doesn't mean percentage sign. It means anything that starts with the characters you typed before that. So it's a magic character in the database land. As a result, you as a developer have to be very careful about letting these magic characters in, because sometimes they can let mischief happen or just bad effects happen. So we typically, when we create lookups for titles, we'll do two things. First of all, we'll have a version of the title which is exactly as spelled, which we'll search for, but we'll also search for it stripped of all punctuation. So in other words, if you said Nighthawk, Spacehawk, and Nighthawk all run together, they'll both get found because stripped of all punctuation, it's the same thing. That's one that, if you type in the stuff stripped of all punctuation, it will find it that way. But there are certain ways you can get into where, depending on how much you type and wherever else, it might not immediately come up. like I say, if it's a onesie twosie title thing out of 69,000 titles or whatever we're up to at this point, you know what? I think I'm going to live with that. But as opposed to doing some elaborate special casing around it. But yeah, that's what's going on with that one. As always, I think on these things we kind of watch and we take our cue from the actual data. All right. Fred asks, if Joe Smith variant cover is a useful item description, then shouldn't HC just run through the whole database? Um, um, I think if I'm understanding the question, so for instance, hardcover, right? Shouldn't you just, for every hardcover, shouldn't you just say hardcover in the item description? Um, yeah, I mean, I guess, but at that point, I feel like hardcover is already gets spelled out in the, when you print a label or when you're looking at the whole thing, is a reasonably well-known acronym for these things. I mean, the goal is to be clear but not redundant, is I guess on the whole thing. And the reason that we have to go to these kind of stupid lengths on this stuff is because A, B, C, D, E, F, G just gives you no information. I mean, all it tells you is, it's a different version, but what about it? Whereas on the other hand, if I say something like, this is the deluxe edition or DLX, or it's the hardcover, or it's the TPB or things like that. Well, I know what I'm looking for the most part. Now, if there were two different trade paperback ones, then I think it's worth talking about why one of them is the A cover and one of them is the B cover of a particular trade paperback. Um, but yeah, I mean, in general, we try not to again be redundant. A little bit of a fine point on that one is also that um, for the most part, the binding types are they're akin to the comic type. In other words, they're not the variant, but they're a description of the edition ahead of that. So, for instance, you might have a book one or a book two, and you might have a hardcover one and a hardcover two, and they'd be the same thing, except one of them's got a hard binding, the other one's got a soft cover binding. So those are typically, if you look at those, you'll see them down in comic type. It gets a little weird, in that there's also, and this was done mostly for people who were changing the media type of things. There is also a hardcover variant that can exist for certain things. And it was mostly because we wanted to have the ability to uh, take something that people had listed as a comic book, switch it into being a book, and have it not just become insensible. As it switched from one to the other. That being said, if you look at how we classify books as we're putting them in new, the binding type will always be ahead of the issue number if there is one. It won't be the variant. It'll be the binding type is ahead of, it's a separate deal. So you don't want to have hardcover number one hardcover edition. That's just weird. All right, and then I think I've beaten that one to death in largely the same way you took about it. So hopefully this is not completely confusing. All right. So is item description is only ID of variants, other possibilities, perhaps gatefold cover, a 15-cent issue, or so forth. It ought to be a elucidation of why this edition has its item number is probably the best way to think of it. So, for instance, think about a Whitman variant, right? So it's the same Bugs Bunny number 286, but the 286A, it's that because it was the one that was published by Whitman, or it was the cover price variant because the other one was 25 cents and this one was 30 cents. I think that's, it's fine to elucidate why it is the variant it was given. And again, I don't think there's a lot of use to doing one that's, if there's already a descriptive variant type at work with the whole thing, like hardcover or something like that. I don't think you add anything by putting the exact same information in the item description. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, for instance, gatefold cover. Gatefold cover is interesting, but it's not what you really care about. I mean, if there was a version that didn't have the gatefold and there was a version that did have the gatefold, then I think it belongs in the item description. And as we get into the into the limits of this whole concept, remember that word cover, and remember talking about the item cleanup that you can do. Well, if you did say gatefold cover in the notes, it's going to always want to put that because it talks about the cover. It's going to want to move it into the item description, but that's not what we really wanted it for. It's I think as editorial style emerges, we might start preferring, if things have gatefold covers, but they're not particularly, they're not particularly key to finding a different edition. We might just have something like we just say something like gatefold, so that they're not subject to that cleanup operation. If you ever run that. All right. Thomas B. Well, hope your day goes better. It says work was brutal. All right. Let's see here. Man, Manuel says going crazy trying to find 7-Eleven Spider-Man Hulk Cap American Spider-Man giveaway 1981 in the database. Wow, that's a great question. So as a general hint on all these things, usually the way you find things best is by going with the weirdest word in the title, and looking for it that way. Unfortunately, most of the words in that title are really common. I would say the one that's not common is 7-Eleven. So Spider-Man, if you look for what are all the things that have Spider-Man, you're going to find hundreds of things. Same thing goes with Hulk. Same thing. Spider-Woman, maybe not as many. But I'd start with looking for 7-Eleven and see if that doesn't get you somewhere. And of course, on all these things, if they've got a barcode, that's always your best way to go, because it'll get you there instantly. And let's see here. I love it. You just scroll down in enlightenment is right there. Ron points out that's the database is Spider-Man, comma Captain America, comma the Incredible Hulk, and Spider-Man and Spider-Woman. Well, there you go. I guess it was sponsored by 7-Eleven, so I guess that would have got you there. Well done. Thank you, mods. All right. Da ba da ba da ba da ba da. Let's see here. Search for a leading the item title works with or without the. Yeah, it's another wrinkle. It's crazy how much behind the scenes stuff we do to try to parse out what you're typing for. So, for instance, we will search for both the title. Let's say you've got a title which begins with the definite article, so a, an, or the in English, and we also recognize. I think we go through all the Western languages. I think there's about 20 different ones like L, or la, or le, or D, D, der, das, for German and so forth. But yes, we went through all the Western languages, and so if you're looking for die Spinne, we'll find both under DIE space SPINNE, and we'll also find it under Spinne, comma D, which of course is the German version of Spider-Man. Same thing goes for El Hombre, whatever else, El Diablo, etc. Officially, like if we're all native Spanish speakers, you'd expect to find that filed under not under E. That'd be silly. It'd be like looking for, all your albums that start with the Beatles or something like that. You file them under B. You don't put them under T for the. But anyway, just to hedge our bets, we look at both ways all the time, and we also look for it stripped of all punctuation. So, yeah, it's crazy. All right. Let's see. HC equals human computing. Well, I guess. All right. Yeah. All right. Let's see here. Single quote and apostrophe is another one that's a weird character. Yeah. So I guess we're going to get onto that one after all. I guess we're going to answer all of like one question this entire show, but that's okay. It's, this is all part of the conversation. That's why we're here. You might have been the one who filled in this morning, but another quote. One that came in was a person was entering in a title which has something like "The Spy," which was in technically inch marks. So a foot in an inch mark is the straight single quote and the straight double quotes. This is the way that people, back in the days of typewriters, are used to thinking of single and double quotes as we're really typing foot and inch marks because typewriters didn't have things that curved one way or the other. Well, then computers came out, and then computers with graphic interfaces came out with the Macintosh, and Apple had to spend an enormous amount of time retraining the world to respect the typography enough to not it's like, guys, there's a fantastic book. God, what was her name? It was called "The Mac Is Not a Typewriter." It was a beautiful book on typography, published back in the early days of the Macintosh. Not an Apple staffer, just a typographer who worked on them. Fantastic book if you guys haven't read it. It's worth digging up because it'll teach you more about typography than you'll ever want to know. But it was all why, yes, curved quotes are not the same as, which is to say, a real single quote is not the same as an inch mark or a foot mark, and straight up double quotes are not the same as inch marks. So it's important to get these kind of things right. And in Copbase, because we grew up in the world that had Macintoshes in it, we from ages spent a lot of time making sure all our, we didn't use foot and inch marks unless we were literally talking about a title like called 6'7" or something, where it was like six, you know foot mark 7. So you wouldn't see straight quote marks in comic base. If it was, you had someone, Denny O'Neill, it was always O apostrophe Neil, and with the curved apostrophe. Problem, of course, is that on PCs, incredibly hard to type those stupid marks. The guys who did the PC, not so into typography as the Mac guys. And so they thought, well, the very obvious way to learn how to type a curved quote mark is, and I have to show this to you because it's too strange to express, is they really wanted you, if I want to type a curved quote, to go to your start menu, pull up a thing called character map, and then go over, and of course, back in the day, you didn't need to actually specify this, but go over to the Windows Western thing. In the original version of Character Map, it would just always come up to Windows Western, based on your settings. But the quote you are looking for is this guy right here. So dial it in, and what the people who invented Windows thought, well, a convenient way to specify character in the ASCII set number, what was it, 219, maybe, maybe that was what they were thinking. But a very convenient way to do this is to say, all right, either go to the character map and you can copy and paste it and put that in every time you want to say don't, can't, aren't, or anything like that. Or you could simply use the shortcut of typing. Do they show it right down there? Yeah, Unicode's, oh, yes, oh, you were Alt plus 0146. So just for fun, if you want to, pull up your favorite word processor and a notepad or something like that, and type don't, DON, and then instead of apostrophe, Alt 0146, put that on the keypad, you will magically be rewarded with the curved quote mark that it should have had. Now, this caused immense amounts of laughter from the Mac crowd. It's like, really, you guys want to, you guys want to, do something that doesn't look like you're typing on a typewriter. You have to type things like this to get to all the right quote marks. It's like, Mac people, we're just used to hitting Alt, quote mark to get, this way, and Alt Shift quote mark to have it go the other way. It made a certain amount more sense, at least. What everyone did in the end, though, is, as much as could possibly be done with word processors and things like that, is they would just auto curve the quotes for you. So you would just be typing "don't," and because it didn't see a space on either side of the apostrophe, it would just automatically swap it so that you would change the straight up quote mark, or a straight up foot mark you typed for the curved quote that it should have been all along. And that's how most Windows software works these days. That also, by the way, is also one of the transformations that we automatically do. We don't do it in real time for you. Well, we do and we don't, but if we see things like that as you're doing a rebuild of your issue information, we will then automatically go and curve all your quotes for you and do things like that, because it's the way it's supposed to be. All right. All right. Let's move on here. I think we got it here. Can a mod poke him? What? Wait. Let's see. Wait. Single quote apostrophe is another one. Garcia. Way missing the point of the question. Okay, Fred, let go back here. Search for leading the works with or without the plus 3 was going was the works going for. It says 1 of 3, and of course I don't have the other 2 things in your thread, man. Yeah, sorry, man. I literally, I don't have. I'm looking at your. You put the thing that says 1 of 3, but literally this is all I get. As I says 1 of 3. I don't have a 2 of 3 to follow the gist of your question. I'm sorry, it didn't come through in the chat. I don't know. It's weird. So my point with the post is the searches are inconsistent with the text as the title, the item title versus the title field. So item title, this item title, hmm, that's a good one to look into. I'm not sure if item title looks for "the" in the front. That's a good point. If it doesn't, then I guess that's something for us to add. But if so, yeah, it's a good one to look into. All right. Yeah, we have the advantage of with titles that we've got the ability to search. Hidden from all y'all is we have a title field, and we also have um, an alpha sort key field, and we have a display title field. So there's actually three different fields that represent the data for a particular title in the database, like a Batman and Robin or Porky Pig or things like that. And so it's pretty quick with the database to search through all three of those fields and see if we get a match on any part of it. Um, with item title, we don't have these alternate pre-computed fields. So there isn't a quick way to ask a database search for, like, if you put in like the Adventures of Robin Hood as an item title. I believe it just searches for Adventures of Robin Hood or the Adventures of Robin Hood. I think it strips of punctuation real quickly. I don't believe it searches for it with the flip the other way. But if we don't do that, yeah, I think it's probably doable. It's a string manipulation. We could probably do it fast enough that we could probably search it without having to pre-compute the field. And that's one good thing, is that when we started ComicBase 30 years ago, computers were much slower. Databases were much slower, and string manipulation cost you something. Now, whipping around characters on strings, it's cheaper, and so we can afford to search by more. So I'll see if I'll look into that. Thanks. All right, let's see here. Fred also says, "I don't think ASCII has curved quotes." Yeah, it does. It's they have them. Uh, Most of the time, it's not even in the upper end of ASCII. Man, oh man, I'm going to bore you guys to tears with a talk on ASCII in about 2 weeks. I'm going to save this one for them, because behind the scenes, something that is so unsexy, I can't even bear myself to bring to talk about during the show, has been occupying stupid amounts of my time on the back end. And at the end of it, yes, the keys are von Bodie, and upper end ASCII. And dear Lord in heaven, this has cost me more sleep than you can ever imagine. But I'll talk about that another time when we get to ASCII, just for fun games. All right, let's see here. Or let's see. Okay. Miles reminded everyone. Don't forget, we have a dedicated thread in the ComicBase message boards. We can request live stream topics and demands. Let's see. For instance, frustrating with a 200 character limit to have P mistake abbreviations, not read all pieces. Yeah, sorry, man. I when I get chats that come through StreamYard, we get them. If you're on, say, YouTube or Facebook or things like that, it ferries it to some kind of common API interface, and I'm not sure how StreamYard. I'm looking at StreamYard, so I'm not sure how the process works for splitting multiple messages and then passing back out to us here. But if I'd say in the future, if that happens again and I don't get your message, just send me multiple 200 character messages one after each other, and it'd probably be better. Let's see. Okay, more things about chats. Item title. Okay, fair enough. TV purple photography and cobalt 60. What? Now I'm so lost. Okay. All right, man. I don't know. All right, guys. Wow, that went fast. I'm gonna call a day, because at this point, I'm operating under the influence of so much Zyrtec that, and I got to get out of here. That I think that's probably as good a place to pack this up as we're gonna get. Um, Now we have one more here. Larry's Library says, consider a way to designate a default cover for a series other than number, order, or whatever is used now. Example: why the 6 Uncanny X-Men defaults to the awful -1 issue. Um, it's funny. It's another of these things. We go to stupid amounts of effort to make it so the default cover that appears in several places is the number one if exists. when Marvel decided they were going to have the -1 covers, and the worst that I think this ever got is I believe X-Files had -3, or might have just been -2. But yes, so it's 3 issues before the beginning or whatever their thinking was. So there's of course an elaborate issue sort that says, all right, well, when you want to sort things that have different binding types, they have different printings, they have different variations, they have different covers, you put that all there. But because Marvel said, or like for instance, the DC said, that we're going to start with the zeroth cover. DC had all their zero issues. I think they're the guys who started it. And then Marvel said, we'll see your zero covers and we'll raise you -1s. The DC said, well, I'll show you, I'll do number million. Yeah, the 90s were fun, weren't they? So you get these things, if you try to sort them in a normal order, you wind up in strange places, and it's not always the one you want to see. I believe in ComicBase, when you just go to a title, it goes to, you just bounce to the title, it goes to whichever one is numerically lowest on the whole thing. I do know on other places in the program, we went to the trouble, and honestly, this is stupid. It actually takes an hour or so to compute, but we'll go title by title through all the titles in, say, Atomic Avenue. And if you go to the title, we'll compute, or like if you're searching and it's going to bring up title results, the picture it shows you to represent the title of, say, Batman, will be the #1 issue. It won't be the #0 issue, because we went to the trouble of sorting through the issue list, finding what we think is the cardinal issue based on things, and then using that, the lowest cardinal issue that isn't a gimmicky one as our starting point. So we'll ignore the half issues, we'll ignore the -1 issues, we'll do things like that. But yeah, that is one that actually takes up, if you want to be able to bring title results up quickly, you have to pre-compute the whole thing all, and the pre-compute is actually pretty labor intensive. So yeah, it's a nice to have for us, but we can't always do it, is kind of where that's at. But yeah, we'll take it for, we'll take it for as we go. All right, guys. Let's see here. For instance, Google on YouTube, Google. Oh, yeah, okay, character kind of, yeah. All right, so getting back to that one. All right, yeah. So, and we have different talk on that one, but guys, I think I'm gonna pack it in there for the night. Thank you all for hanging with me. Hopefully, the allergy season here in Tennessee will be a little bit less pronounced next week, and I'll get a break on this one. And we'll see you all the week after, or the day after Valentine's. Hope you guys all have a good one. We'll see you then. Bye bye.